This is Robert Harper with Virginia Farm Bureau's Grain Division, bringing you the Merchandiser Minute for Friday, September the 20th, 2019, taking a look back at the week that was and trying to look a little bit ahead to maybe what next week will bring. We really saw a lot of sideways trade this week in the futures. Let's take a look at those prices here briefly. December corn traded all week long and closed right where it opened at on Sunday night. It closed at $3.70 on the Chicago board. November beans were down 21 cents this week, taking most of that, or about half of that loss just today. And December wheat was down 4 cents for the week, closing at $4.84. When we look at the USDA numbers that we got, crop progress on Monday, corn is rated 55% good to excellent. Last year on this date, it was rated 68% good to excellent, and we saw the first indication of harvest numbers coming in from USDA. They had the corn crop at 4% harvested, so just barely getting started on it in the Corn Belt. The bean good to excellent rating came in on Monday at 54%. Last year we were at 67% good to excellent on soybeans. When we look at our Monday morning export loadings report, what actually got loaded onto vessels, for corn, wheat, and beans, all three came in as expected. So that was pretty neutral on an influence to your futures price. Our top destinations this week, once again, like every week, Japan and Mexico for corn. For wheat, we saw Ecuador and Sri Lanka come in as our top loadout destinations. And it was beautiful to see China on the export inspection or the loadings list this week for soybeans. When we look at the sales report, we were way above expectation this week in the Thursday sales report for corn. The United States still has the most expensive corn in the world, so it was neat to see a big week for U.S. corn sales. And remember, we are on the slowest pace for corn exports since 2012 in reference to corn. Soybeans also came in above expectation. We all heard last week we had the small purchase of soybeans by China as they're working with us on these trade talks, and that showed up in this week's report. And wheat was way below average this week on export sales. There was a lot of wheat that traded this week globally, but the United States just didn't get the business. When we look at some of the eye catchers this week, we heard some brand new language from President Trump several times about an interim trade deal with China. We know really for the last 2 weeks, our trade team has been meeting with the Chinese trade team over the phone. We've had lots of rhetoric about tariffs being delayed. We heard that last week, and we saw China make the bean purchase. But then this week, we saw President Trump say in a statement that he's ready to escalate the trade war unless China comes to terms soon. So we had the face-to-face meeting with China this week in Washington. However, they did cut their trip short. They had farm visits planned in Montana and in Nebraska and cut those visits short and went back home. And that might have been what took a little bit of wind out of the soybean futures today as we closed down 10 for the day. When we also look at weather this week, the Corn Belt, we're seeing in most parts above normal temperatures, and those are predicted for next week as well. You know, the year that the crop is planted really as late as it's ever been. It's phenomenal to see so far an extended growing season. And as speculators look to try to determine what yield is going to be on the corn and soybean crop, it really seems like we're just going to have to wait till the combines get in the field and get going. When we drop down to weather in South America, remember the Brazil farmers in the Mato Grosso area, they can start planting this time of year. Conditions there are dry, not abnormally dry from what I see and listen to, but dry. That could definitely have a positive impact on your futures price in the weeks ahead if those conditions stay that way in Brazil. We did have some more information about African swine fever. Remember, this has been in the news really since the spring, April of 2018. We did see Russia this week say they found new cases of African swine fever in their hog herd, and we also saw for the first time a case found in South Korea. Now, obviously, this is very disturbing. This disease does spread. It's very contagious. We have no vaccine. Y'all know all the story on that, but remember, South Korea buys a fair amount of U.S. corn. So that looks pretty negative towards demand if they can't control that disease there. We also saw Informa release this week their guesses on 2020 U.S. corn and soybean acres. I guess I should say their estimates. They're estimating today, this week, 95.1 million acres of corn planted next year in the United States. Obviously, that number is not friendly to your corn price. And they have soybeans estimated at 84.2 million acres to be planted next year. Remember, we don't actually get that number from the USDA until the end of March in the prospective plantings report, but it's good to have some numbers out there for people to discuss. We saw a big push this week in Washington from the ag community and from politicians right up to President Trump's office, a big push to get the USMCA ratified, the redo of the NAFTA agreement. Remember, we are right at 1 year since the three countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, signed a deal. Mexico has ratified it in their government. Canada is waiting on us to do it, I believe. So there was a lot of talk this week about getting that done and bringing it to a vote in Congress. Remember, now that China and our relationship with China has changed, Mexico and Canada are our #1 trade partners. Really, through about Wednesday of this week, the news cycle was dominated with the missile strikes onto some oil refinery fields in Saudi Arabia. We saw crude oil futures spike the most they had done since 1991 when the Gulf War was occurring, the first Gulf War. Those crude oil prices, we got to watch those very closely. We know they're tied directly and indirectly to what goes on in the ethanol industry. And obviously a lot of speculators who buy energy, buy crude oil, and buy corn as well. We also saw in that arena this week President Trump laying out a plan to reallocate the RFS waivers of the last 3 years. We know the ethanol industry has been working closely with his administration on that. So going into next week, keep your eye on South American weather and North American weather. We know this is a unique time where both hemispheres are influencing the futures part of your price. Reports from the USDA next week will be normal, but the crop progress, the loadings and sales, but everybody's looking out to September 30th when we get the quarterly stocks report, and then into October on October 10th when we get the next crop production report. Give us a call if we can help you with basis. Stay safe in the field. And this is Robert with Virginia Farm Bureau's Grain Division.